Joe's lived here all his life, but he's not from around here. Street names are different, landmarks lie, and even money shows presidents he's never known. Some versions of Fort Wayne, Indiana are apocalyptical wastelands. Others harbor dark secrets. But when trouble strikes, Joe opens a trash can and tears a six-dimensional rift in reality. Inside lies a void where he glimpses the multiverse and rides unknown currents to another Fort Wayne, Indiana, hoping that this one may actually feel like home. With each crossing, his memories slip away. Only Nobuyuki, his shape-shifting Kitsune companion, remains constant, and they are hiding secrets about Joe's past that he may never remember. In a multiverse where the next trash can might lead to salvation or doom, Joe must find his way back before he forgets what home is. Middle-Aged Man in a Trash Can by William Bryan Johnson, published by Wild Rose Press, and available June 25th, 2025. Pre-orders are now available. And welcome to Tiki Man and the Viking podcast. He is Tiki Man.
I am H.P. Barlow, the author of 2 historical crime fiction series, The Ark City Confidential Chronicles and The Wichita Chronicles. And he is the Viking.
I am William Bryan Johnson, author of Hell to Pay, The Dark Cry of Aristid, and this actually should be ready for pre-order when this goes live, Middle-Aged Man in a Trash Can.
Woo!
Coming June 25th.
June 25th. Excellent. It's great that we'll have the pre-order available, and we'll hype that up more. But we're continuing our intro or run-up to OWFI, the Oklahoma Writers Federation, Inc. conference from May 1st to May 3rd. And today we'll be welcoming one of the faculty members, Dr. Forrest Isaac Jones. Brian, why don't you tell them something about Dr. Jones?
Certainly. Dr. Forrest Isaac Jones is an award-winning author of nonfiction and essays, specializing in the study of Irish history, the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, and Northern Ireland. His latest essay, The Civil Rights Connection Between the USA and Northern Ireland, was awarded honorable mention in the category of nonfiction essay by Writer's Digest in the 93rd Annual Writing Competition. Over the years, Dr. Jones has won awards from Writer's Digest in 2022 and 2023. His award-winning essay about African Americans at D-Day was published in 2024 by World War II History magazine. In addition to writing, Dr. Jones is a frequent speaker who has given talks about everything from African Americans at D-Day to the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Dr. Jones holds a doctorate degree from Virginia Tech in education and a master's degree from Hollins University in history, focusing on Northern Ireland and South African history. He currently lives in Salem, Virginia, and his first nonfiction book, Good Trouble, The Selma, Alabama, and Derry, Northern Ireland Connection, 1963 to 1972, was just released on April 1st. Welcome, Dr. Jones.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I saw some posts on Facebook. You've already had one book signing in Winchester. Was that correct?
Mm-hmm. That is
and
correct.
I remember you posted that you sold your first book. And by the way, on Amazon, you also have your first 5-star review. So the book was released less than 2 weeks ago. You're already kicking it.
It has been an exciting last couple of weeks. It's been good. Everything positive. Yep.
I tell you, I read the description of the book, Good Trouble, on Amazon, and they're both about the resistance and fighting against things. And you mentioned your parents were involved in the Selma movement and so forth. How did you get that connection to Northern Ireland? Where did that interest come from in your life?
Sure, that's a great question. I'm going to start back when I was getting my master's degree back in 2001, and I was at Hollins University. And I had a really good professor by the name of Dr. Peter Coogan, who was a history professor, but also my advisor at the time at Hollins. And he knew I was a history nerd, just like he was. and we were talking about what type of um, independent study I would do for the master's program at Hollins. And he knew I had an interest in all types of history, but he also, his background was Ireland. His background was Irish history. So
Okay.
he asked me, he said, have you ever heard anything about the Troubles? And I said, well, yeah, I've heard bits and pieces. I knew about the IRA and, Bloody Sunday and things like that. And he said, well, I think you may be interested in it if you, take a deep dive into it. So he was the reason why I got interested in Northern Ireland back then. So what I did, I went ahead and did my main thesis, whatever you want to call it, thesis, independent study on Northern Ireland and the Troubles. When I did it, I went back early 20th century, the fight for Irish independence, the split of Ireland, partition of Ireland, and then we jumped up to 1972, the Bloody Sunday, when the unarmed protesters were shot and killed in Derry by the British Army. We went ahead and went into the IRA, the Troubles, late 70s, early 80s, all the way up to the Good Friday Peace Agreement in 1998. So that's where the story ended. That's where my thesis, independent study, whatever you want to call it, ended. And I visited Ireland for the first time in 2001. Had a lovely visit. I was there
Wow.
for about a week. And I was young at the time, so I wasn't really, doing all the touristy, historical stuff. So fast forward to 2021, and I visited Belfast for the second time. Hadn't been back in 20 years, and it had changed dramatically.
Yep.
And one thing I wanted to do, I wanted to dive deeper into, okay, where do the Protestants live? Where do the Catholics live? What's the status since it's been, so many years since the Good Friday Peace Agreement? And that was wonderful. Had a great time. At the same time, you guys remember we were coming out of COVID, and during COVID, I had read a fantastic book called On Bloody Sunday by Julianne Campbell. Julianne Campbell, her uncle was one of the first people killed at Bloody Sunday in 1972.
Wow. Whoa.
It was an incredible book, incredible book. So I reached out to Julianne on Twitter. Of course, you're locked down during COVID. That's about all you could do is, talk on social media. And I told her, I said, this was an incredible book. I was really, really impressed by it. And we hit it off. We hit it off on we talked, we became, if you want to say, Twitter friends at the time. Fast forward to when I was in Northern Ireland in 2021, she told me she made a mistake. She said, if you're ever over in Northern Ireland, you
Oh
need to
yeah.
come to Derry
Right.
because that's where she was born and raised and lived in Derry. And lo and behold, I took her up on it. I said, hey, I'm coming. You want to hang out in Derry? So I went to Derry for the first time. Derry is known as the civil rights capital of Northern Ireland.
Okay.
And when I was there, we of course had a great time, great hospitality. But going back to your original question, because I had to set it up for this, I met so many people in Derry, especially, who came up to me, of course, being a person, a black man from the United States, and they were saying stuff like, we stole so much from you guys.
Huh.
I didn't know what they were
Wow.
talking about because I'm a history major, had no clue what they were talking about. And I was like, well, what exactly do you mean? And they're like, the civil rights movement. We basically use your civil rights movement as a template for our civil rights movement here in Northern Ireland. Me being a history major, I was blown away. Could not believe it.
Wow. Wow.
So
Yeah.
everywhere you went in Derry, you saw murals of Martin Luther King, you saw murals of Malcolm X. The more people I talked to, I could tell, man, this is really interesting. This is something that I did not know about, and I need to learn more about. Long story short, Julianne was there, and she said, "You got to write a book." She said, "This is a book waiting for you
Right.
to write." So, yeah, again, the stars aligned. I kind of just basically was right there in the middle of it, and that's how the idea came back in 2021.
My goodness. My goodness. Do you find that if people were to study history more, they'd find more parallels of this sort throughout history?
I really do. I really do. I always tell people, I don't think being a history teacher, being a history person that studied it for years, I still think there's so many things that we just don't know. And so many
Absolutely.
stories that are left to be told. And so many things that, as your question alluded to, where we worked together and there was collaboration. And what's the old saying? Imitation is the greatest form of flattery.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And I do. I think the more you look into it, I think you would see those connections. Yeah.
Huh. And of course, they always say those that don't know history are doomed to repeat it.
Repeat it.
No doubt. No doubt.
Yeah. And I guess potentially we could be seeing some of that today, but we're not going to get into that for this discussion. Uh, when it comes to that comment about not knowing, how do you know when a work, whether it's an essay or a book, is
Mhm.
complete? If you have any feelings that, I might be missing something here, when do you say the essay is done or the book is done?
After I have about 10 people read it.
Okay. Okay.
No, but seriously, you know, I think when you write a book, it's almost like it's kind of like a movie. You got a beginning, you got a
Hmm.
middle, and you
Hmm.
got an end. It's kind of like a story arc. And I don't care what you write. I think you're always looking for that story arc. You're looking at what's the beginning, what's the
Okay.
middle, how are you going to wrap everything up, basically. And one of the things that I did, and I'll talk about the current book, which I will say the essay that I wrote was kind of not kind of, it was at the same time when I was working on the book, which was pretty interesting. And when I was working on both of them, the ending, I wanted to see, okay, I made all these connections. I showed people, how our movement has such an influence on the Catholic civil rights movement. And I wanted to kind of show, okay, what's it like today in both places, here in the United States and in
Okay.
Northern Ireland. So going back to your question, I kind of looked at it, okay, how am I going to almost wrap everything up at the end to show not
Mm.
only the connection that I showed at the beginning and the middle of the book and essay, but wrap it up at the end showing, okay, what's it like today? How has it influenced today? And where are we going moving forward?
I think that's something that people would expect. I mean, if you talk about history having an impact on today, if you don't show that, you're leaving something out dramatically.
Correct.
Now, do
Correct.
you do
Correct.
you do you think that okay, so the U.S. civil rights movement influenced Derry? Has Derry and their movement influenced anybody of the past 20 or 30 years?
That's a really good question. I would say it had to have. I mean, just because of how popular is probably the wrong word, how publicized the fight for the civil rights was in Northern Ireland, and when I say that, I mean after 1972, when Bloody Sunday happened, Julianne Campbell, who again we become great friends, she actually wrote the introduction to the book. And one of the things that she mentioned to me, and I was really struck by this comment because I did not know this, and it really put everything in perspective. She said, you got to remember when Bloody Sunday occurred, that was still there was still a fight for civil rights. That was a civil rights march.
Okay.
And when it happened, you had all these unarmed people who were killed. You had the British Army, which that was a whole nother set of controversy there with them being there for as long as they had been. And she told me, she said, Forrest, she said that was the end of the civil rights movement. And she said also that was the biggest recruitment for the Irish Republican Army
Mm.
that they had ever seen,
Hmm.
really, even after 1972. And if you look at the statistics, 1972 statistically was the worst year for violence in Northern Ireland. So all that stuff put together in 1972 that happened really showed that the civil rights movement was over. Now, one of the reasons I'm bringing that up is because going back to your question, how has that impacted people today? You still have a lot of people that were part of the civil rights movement who are still fighting, for instance, for Palestine. And if you've been reading, I don't know how much you guys read about what's going on in Northern Ireland and in Ireland, the Palestine situation is very, very newsworthy right now. And they had a big march, I want to say 2 or 3 days ago in Derry about free Palestine. And I believe some doctors had been killed in Palestine. There was an attack where um, some doctors had been killed. So, again, that movement still today, especially in Northern Ireland and Ireland, still resonates with people that are fighting for, I would put it as people who are, in their eyes, are being oppressed, and people who, in the book, such as Bernadette Devlin, Eamon McCann, there are some others as well, people who are now in their late 70s who march, who were on the front line, are still doing that today and influencing another generation that are doing it today as well. The interesting thing, and this is the thing that really has excited me and I think has helped bring interest to the book. If you go over there, everybody knows, oh, yeah, we were heavily influenced by John Lewis, Luther King. We were singing We Shall Overcome, et cetera, et cetera. If you talk to people here, people of African American heritage, I guarantee you 95% have no idea about the influence and the connection between the two.
Wow.
Almost every person I've talked to who are African American are amazed about the connections. My own parents who marched in the 60s and were part of the civil rights movement had no idea, had no
Wow.
clue. So I think over there, they definitely know about it, but over here, it's still pretty new. People are learning about the close connection between the two, which is cool. Yeah.
For
So,
sure.
on planning a nonfiction book like this, did you have quite a detailed outline, or did you just kind of have your high points that you were wanting to cover and then kind of see where the writing took you?
It was a little bit of a combination of two. I think anything you write, you've got to have some sort of outline.
Mhm.
And I knew that I had to have something in terms of, and this is really both the movements, people who were involved in both movements. If you look at the book, there are sections, for instance, there's a section on John Lewis. There's a section on Bernadette Devlin, who I just mentioned. There's a section on John Hume, another leader in Northern Ireland. There's a section on SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coalition here in the United States. So I looked at that as, okay, how can I show the important people who took part in this and the important events that kind of, were the backbone of both civil rights movements. So I had to do that when it came to an outline. I also knew I wanted to get Julianne involved, and I asked her to write the introduction because she's lived it. She's been there. She was, heavily involved with everything in Derry. Still very popular there. And then I knew at the end that, okay, how am I going to wrap this thing up? What do I need to know about what's going on today? So I had an outline, had a chapter by chapter outline. And after I've got my chapter by chapter outline, that's when I really dug into the research. I went to the archives up in DC. There's a place in Belfast called the Linden Hall Library that has a lot of rare archives there, newspaper clippings, interviews, things like that. But I tell you, the biggest thing that probably made this book better than I thought it thought originally it was going to be was, being a history teacher, and you can definitely relate to this teaching middle school
Mm.
or being in middle school, is that if you're doing history, and I used to teach my kids this all the time, you've got to do some primary sources. You've
Yes.
got to, because if you don't, you're really missing out on a piece of something that could be very, very beneficial to your work. So after I had my outline, I was like, okay, now comes the hard part. How am I going to find these people to interview? Because I didn't know I didn't know anybody who was part of Bloody Sunday. I didn't know anybody who was on the Summit of Montgomery March. So what I did, I was lucky enough, I had a friend of mine who was a professor at Virginia Tech, and he's been everywhere. And I said, well, if anybody knows somebody who was at that Selma March, he probably does. So I reached out to him. His name is Dr. Warney Reed, and he was able to put me in touch with a woman. Her name is Cheyenne Webb Kreisberg, who spoke at a school that he used to teach at many, many years ago. And he still had her contact. He said, hey, this is her contact information. He said, reach out to her and just let her know, hey, this is what I'm doing. I heard you spoke with, or I heard you worked with Dr. Reed back years ago. Can you help me? And that really that opened the door. If you don't know about Cheyenne Webb Kreisberg, I believe she was 8 years old at the time. Grew up in Selma, grew up 2 blocks from Brown's Chapel, where Dr. King preached, and she actually, funny story, um, Miss Kreisberg and a friend of hers at the time when King was down there, somehow got into the church where he was meeting. And he had all these dignitaries. They're in the middle of a meeting. These 2 little girls come in, and they, of course, rush right to Dr. King because they know him.
Hmm.
And the other dignitaries are like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" They're trying to get him out of here. Dr. King's like, "No, no, 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 no. Let him stay." And of course, Dr. King introduced himself, and they sat there during the rest of the meeting right by his side. And she was known as King's little soldier. You can see pictures of her marching with King in Selma. She
Wow.
went. She was on. She was there Bloody Sunday, and she talks about being beaten. Talks about everything that bad had happened there, and she was on the march from Selma to Montgomery. So that was great. I mean, I can't thank Dr. Reed enough for that help that he gave me. Then I knew I had to get some more people. So luckily, being a reader that I am, I read an article that a reporter from USA Today did many, many years ago. And they had interviewed people who were known as the Courageous Eight. And I don't know if you guys have heard of the Courageous Eight, but
No.
long story short, the Courageous Eight in Selma were people who were teachers, church people, professionals who basically were the black leaders of Selma in the early 60s. They were the reason Dr. King went to Selma. They basically got King to come to Selma. So the lady who interviewed all these people, unfortunately, all of them are passed away. I reached out to her and I said, hey, this is what I'm doing. I don't know anybody down there. Can you help me? And she was wonderful. She gave me the contacts of all her people she interviewed. So I was able to interview a lot of the relatives of the
Good.
Courageous Eight. And I was able to interview Richard Smiley, who, if you don't know his name, he was at Bloody Sunday. I think he was 14 years old at the time. So anyway, a lot of collaboration came into getting some of those primary sources. Over in Northern Ireland, Julianne, I cannot tell you how much of a help she was. I interviewed her uncle, who of course was part of the movement. Interviewed a couple other people that were on the front lines over in Northern Ireland at the time, and then probably the biggest interview I got was Eamon McCann. Eamon McCann's kind of like the John Lewis of Northern Ireland. He's still alive, and I was able to interview him as well.
Oh, wow.
Can you talk about the editing process? Now, as fiction writers, we write our book, we write our draft, we turn it over to our editor, and they're talking about headhunting, they're talking about person perspective and passive. What's the editing process like on a nonfiction book?
Whew, exhaustive.
Well, yeah, well, of course, yeah.
I tell you, this was such a fun project, but there were some times where I was like, man, I can't believe I have to do all of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
You write it. And of course you got to remember you're interviewing all these people. So you've got all these interviews, of course, on tape, and you've got to transcribe them.
Yeah.
People forget about
Yep. Yep.
that. So I did have to transcribe the interviews. Now, honestly, I actually enjoyed transcribing them because it's almost like you're interviewing them again,
Mhm.
which was kind of neat. So you transcribe the interviews, and what I did was each interview I sent it to that person and said, "Hey, this is what I have. This is what I wrote down. Let me know if there's anything I missed. Let me know if there's anything that you want me to take out." And there were some situations where some people said, "Hey, I want you to take this out," or "You forgot about this." So that took some time just reaching out to people and getting their feedback, because I think that's important. I think you want to make sure these people took the time to interview with you. You want to make sure that you get down exactly what they want you to put in the book. And it was funny. Some people, of course, were like, I don't even want to look at it. I've trusted you." So it just depended who you talk to and what their reaction was. So that's the first thing. You've got to transcribe it. Once you transcribe it, you really got to. You can't put everything in there. I mean, the book would have
Of
been
course.
500
Right.
pages long
Right.
if you did. So I really had to pick and choose how the story, again, even though it's nonfiction, I still think it's a story. How the story flows. Does it fit into what I'm trying to show and what I'm trying to portray about the connection between the two? So you do that. That whole process took about a year to get all that done. Once you get, I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Once you get um, the publisher was great to work with, but one thing you had to do, there was an editing process, and you had they like to call them, some people call them beta readers, some people call them there's another name that I'm forgetting right now. But anyway, beta readers who actually read the book and say,
Right.
"Hey, you missed this, or this doesn't make sense," or et cetera, et cetera. So I had about gosh, close to 10
Okay.
who were beta readers, and they were people, professors. They were just people, friends that I knew, just people that were not really associated with the book, but they could read it with a critical eye to give me some ideas about stuff. So that was the first step in the process. After I got all their feedback returned to me, I went back into the manuscript and I made the changes that they gave me. I'll be honest, I didn't make all the changes. I looked at, okay, does this make sense? Okay, I don't know what they're talking about there. I don't like that. So I used my own critical eye to add and delete the feedback that they gave me. Sent that back to the publisher, and then we had an editor who was part of the publishing group who worked with me. I want to say we did. I want to say we did three drafts, not drafts, but three edits, and that was fantastic because you guys know as writers, it is hard to edit your own stuff. So it's so good to have an editor look at it and say, "Hey, you missed this," or "Hey, that doesn't make sense," or
Yep.
"That date."
Oh yeah.
So you had people who were looking at historical dates, historical information to make sure everything was correct with that, grammatical stuff, and just make sure everything was flowing well. After we did that, and that was time consuming as well as you can imagine. I had to make sure that the sources were correct, and I had to make sure that the sources matched the notes in the back of the book. And I also had to make sure that there was an index in the back of the book that
Got it.
explained chapter
Got
by
it.
chapter
Yeah.
the different topics. So honestly, that was probably the hardest part of the book. Everything else, I thought I got through it and that was fine. But the sources, going back through each chapter, doing the sources, that was a excruciating job.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So I mean, there were some analogies between fiction and nonfiction in terms of coming up with the idea, creating it, the editing. You just have that extra step of citing sources, which are important. Well, you will be presenting 2 sessions, or you'll be presenting one session called Digging into History. This session will help you understand how to turn the historical experiences of others into riveting stories with universal themes. I think that session is going to be fruitful for both fiction and nonfiction writers. You and Dr. Carlos Hill will be presenting a luncheon called Truth or Consequences. Bob Barker is not going to be involved in this, for those who are old enough to remember the game show.
Drew Carey now, kids.
Yes, of course. You're going to use their vast experience as professors, historians, and authors to teach us how to weed through false historical information to get to the truth of the story. And I got to tell you something, once again, that relates to nonfiction. That also relates to fiction, because there's a lot of fiction writers who don't get to the heart of the story, and there's a lot of fluff on top. So that's going to be interesting. OWFI, May 1st to May 3rd, Conjuring the Mysteries of Writing, whether you're writing fiction, nonfiction, poetry, anything. I think this is going to be one of the most interesting conferences, because I've been going since 2012. There's going to be a wider variety of faculty members, and we are thrilled to have had the opportunity to chat with you. We will be happy to buy you one of the free drinks at the Friday and Saturday hour happy hour, because that's all we can afford ourselves. Any final comments, Dr. Jones?
Not at all. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you guys for having me. And I will say this: it was an incredible project to work on. It was truly collaborative with all the people that you can't do this on your own, and all the people that helped me in terms of getting interviews, et cetera, you name it. And probably the biggest thrill for me is my parents are in the book. I got to interview my parents, who luckily are still alive, and that's probably the biggest thrill for me.
With all these extra stories that you have, are you going to do something? Are you going to write additional books on this, or what's kind of the plans for what's next?
Yeah, I have a couple of ideas that are actually in the States that I would love to work on. I think I will, probably not the next project, but I know I will eventually return to something dealing with Northern Ireland. I've got an idea in mind that I think would be a great project. So definitely looking forward to working on future ideas over there. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, one of the things we love to do on this podcast is end with one of our famous sayings, and that is
read a book.
I love it.
We look forward to meeting you in person, Dr. Jones. Thank you so much for hanging out with us this evening.
Thank you guys both. I enjoyed it.
Take care. Tiki Man and the Viking podcast, brought to you by Rumination of Thunder Media. The following intro and outro music was used for this media project. The music Find Them by Alexander Nakrata. Free download from filmmusic.io. License Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International.